Hi, this is Lisa. Thank you for joining me. I'm back today with something slightly different for you. I've got 5 cards with 5 different backgrounds, and these are using some pre-coloured images that I coloured during the last Daily Marker colouring challenge, which is hosted by Kathy Rakusin of thedailymarker.com. I'll link to that in my YouTube description and over on my blog so that you can find out more about it if you want to. So this video is not about colouring the images at all. This is really just about making different backgrounds and assembling the cards. And as you can see, this set of images I coloured, and I just want to make sure that I do actually use them this time. So I've prepared some panels and some bases. The bases are 4x4 square cards, and the die cut panels are just slightly smaller. So I'm going to start the first panel with some simple ink blending, and I wanted my blending to be soft and in the centre of the card. So in order to get it smooth and in the centre without any foam marks from the foam, I tap most of the ink off to the side before I bring the tool to the centre. And you can just work in layers, really. I mean, I really do remove most of the ink, so you'll see that not a huge amount goes down each time. I just keep tapping it off, and I just use quite a soft hand so that I can avoid getting any marks, and that way you can get a really lovely blend in the centre of the card, which is, I think, really nice as a kind of backdrop to the images. For my second card, I'm going to do a little bit of stenciling. So I wanted to mask off an area of the panel to apply the stencil to. So I cut a circular mask from masking paper, and I'm just going to attach that now to the die cut panel. And in order for me to do the stenciling, I always attach my panel down to my surface first and then the stencil on top so that it doesn't move around. I'm going to use Bundled Sage for this, and it's quite a soft colour. I'm not worrying too much about how good the blending is because I really just want it as a pop of colour. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I don't want it too heavy so it detracts from the images. And on the third card, I'm going to do some more masking, but this time I'm going to do the emboss resist technique, which is one of my favourite. So I prepared my mask, and then I stamped my background stamp with Versamark ink. I took my masked panel and I just pressed down. So essentially I'm just transferring the ink into the part that isn't covered by the mask. And I'm going to add some Hero Arts clear embossing powder onto the panel. I could have left the mask on actually, but I did decide to take it off. And I'm just going to heat set that. So as with all heat embossing, it's really important to let your heat gun heat up first before you bring it to the paper to avoid the warping. And for this panel, I decided to use weathered wood, and I haven't used this wood grain stamp in ages, and it's really a lovely stamp actually, and it suits the images, so that's why I wanted to use it really. And again, I've used a soft colour. I've used weathered wood because I want the images to stand out. I don't want to lose them. On to my fourth card, I think this is. I decided to try the Nouveau mousse. Now it's actually quite a thick mousse, but I've added a little bit of water to it, so it makes it much easier to move around. And I'm just going to spread some onto my panel. Now, in hindsight, I wish I'd done this slightly differently, but hindsight's a wonderful thing in card making. I wish that I had done it through a cloud stencil, but I really just put some paste down into a circular sort of area for my images to sit on. Now, just moving on to my final card, I decided to use texture paste for this. And as I did with the other stencil, I've attached my base and my stencil on top, and then I'm just applying the texture paste through it and as evenly as I possibly can. Once I've done that, you should always do this. Make sure you clean your stencil straight away and your palette knife, because it's really hard to get that off if you leave it, and you'll ruin your stencil. And then I decided that rather than leave it white, I would add a little bit of silver glitter embossing powder onto the texture paste. So because the paste is actually wet, it sticks really well to it, and you can use a heat gun to actually dry the embossing powder on top. So I let my heat gun get hot, and then I just took it to the paper, and it makes it lovely and sparkly. So I'm just going to move on now to the assembling of the cards, and I put double-sided adhesive tape onto the back of each one so they lay flat onto the panels, but most of my images are actually on double-sided foam tape, so that it gives them lots of dimension really. So you'll see here I'm using the My Favourite Things birthday bear images here, and I'm just attaching them to the card, and I forgot to put my sentiment on at the beginning, so I've put the whole lot in the MISTI and hope that it's stamped okay, and it didn't move around, so so that was good. But whilst I was there, I decided that I would do this sentiment for the second card as well, so I've double stamped that. I use VersaFine Onyx Black for my sentiments, and that one's now ready for the images to go on. And for this one I've used My Favourite Things Happy Hedgehogs. Really cute images. I've popped most of them up with double-sided foam tape, but the leaves and the actual little trunk I glued straight down onto the panel with Ranger Multimedia Matte. And I literally just attached that to the panel. It's a very sweet little set. Now this one is the wood grain background, and for this card I'm using My Favourite Things Sweet Forest Friends. It's such an adorable set, and I really like the wood grain background for these images. I thought it just fitted really well. And for this card, I couldn't stamp directly onto the panel because of the ink, so I stamped some onto a separate piece of white card, and I just mounted it up with foam tape, and I think that might be my favourite of the cards. So this card is the Moose card, and you'll see I use the My Favourite Things Magical Dragons for this card, and I do just pop them on top, and it kind of ends up okay, but it would have looked nicer if I had done something, I think, through a stencil. I managed to cover up that little splotch at the top using the dragon, and so that hides that. I mean, the moose is quite loose, so it did just splatter a little bit there. And then just moving on to the final card, this one's a Christmas card, and I'm going to use the Lawn Fawn Frosty Fairy Friends on this panel. So I stamped the sentiment. It's actually from a Simon Says stamp set that I got last year, but it fitted well, so I used that, and I attach that to the panel in a minute. But in the meantime, I've added some foam tape to the back of the images, and I just start popping them up onto the top of this glittery panel. And it's a really sweet set. It was very popular at the end of last year. I'm sure that you will have seen it. And I add a little wand to the fairy just using Ranger Multimedia Matte, and the tree, which I put to the left side, again is just, I just use wet adhesive for that. So some of that's popped up and some of it actually lays flat, and I add the sentiment on at the end. So that finishes the 5 cards. That's just a little run through of each one. They're all really sweet. They're quite simple to make. Each technique is not particularly difficult, but I really do like how they ended up. So thank you so much for watching. All supplies are going to be listed over on my blog if you're interested, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you. Bye.